Hello, my friends, and welcome to a reading of the Wisdom of Confucius. I received this book from my father when I inherited it from my father when he passed away when I was about 15. It's an original copy of the Wisdom of Confucius from the year 1900, so it's 120 years old, and there's a lot of wisdom to be learned from Eastern mysticism, Buddhism, Hinduism, but Confucianism and the Wisdom of Confucius is separate from religion and belief systems, and it's more about what it means to be a human. And so I'm going to read the introduction here, and over a period of time I will read more chapters because I think it's worth sharing. It says, The Wisdom of Confucius, with critical and biographical sketches by Epiphanius Wilson. Now, Epiphanius, which obviously sounds like a pseudonym, it may be a real name, but you can Google him. He worked on this one as well as some other Eastern books, Zen-like discussions. This is an original copy from 1900, so I try not to damage it too bad here. And instead of me explaining what Confucianism is, I thought I would read an introduction, because I think everyone should know exactly what this is all about. Introduction. The strangest figure that meets us in the annals of the Oriental thought is that of Confucius. To the popular mind, he is the founder of a religion, and yet he has nothing in common with the great religious teachers of the East. We think of Siddhartha, the founder of Buddhism, as the very impersonation of romantic asceticism, enthusiastic self-sacrifice and faith in the things that are invisible. Zoroaster is the friend of God, talking face to face with the Almighty and drinking wisdom and knowledge from the lips of omniscience. Mohammed is represented as snatched up into heaven, where he receives the divine communications, which he is bidden to propagate with fire and sword throughout the world. These great teachers lived in an atmosphere of the supernatural. They spoke with the authority of inspired prophets. They brought the unseen world close to the minds of their disciples. They spoke positively of immortality, of reward or punishment beyond the grave. The present life they despised. The future was to them everything in its promised satisfaction. The teachings of Confucius were of a very different sort. Throughout his whole writings, he has not even mentioned the name of God. He declined to discuss the questions of immortality. When he was asked about spiritual beings, he remarked, "If we cannot even know men, how can we know spirits?" Yet this was the man, the impress of whose teachings has formed the national character of 500 million people. Side note, this is well over 1 billion now. As this was written 100 years ago, there were 500 million people, and now there are, I think, 1.3 billion, if I'm not mistaken. A temple to Confucius stands to this day in every town and village of China. His precepts are committed to memory by every child from the tenderest age, and each year at the Royal University at Pekin, the emperor holds a festival in honor of the illustrious teacher. The influence of Confucius springs, first of all, from the narrowness and definiteness of his doctrine. He was no transcendentalist, and never meddled with supramundane things. His teaching was of the earth, earthy. It dealt entirely with the common relations of life, and the golden rule he must necessarily have stumbled upon as the most obvious canon of his system. He strikes us as being the great Stoic of the East, for he believed that virtue was based on knowledge of a man's own heart, and knowledge of humankind. There is a pathetic resemblance between the accounts given of the death of Confucius and the death of Zeno. Both died almost without warning in dreary hopelessness, without the ministrations of either love or religion. This may be a mere coincidence, but the lives and teachings of both men must have led them to look with indifference upon such an end. For Confucius, in his teaching, treated only of man's life on earth, and seems to have had no ideas with regard to the human lot after death. If he had any ideas, he preserved an inscrutable silence about them. As a moralist, he prescribed the duties of the kings and the father, and advocated the cultivation by the individual man of that rest or apathy of mind which resembles so much of the disposition by the Greek and Roman Stoic. Even as a moralist, he seems to have sacrificed the ideal to the practical, and his loose notions about marriage, his tolerance of concubinage, the slight emphasis which he lays on the virtue of veracity, of which, indeed, he does not seem himself to have been particularly studious in his historic writings, place him low down on the rank of moralists. Yet he taught what he felt the people could receive, and the flat mediocrity of his character and his teachings has been stamped forever upon a people who, while they are kindly, gentle, forbearing, and full of family piety, are palpably lacking not only in the exaltation of mysticism, but in any religious feelings generally so called. The second reason that made the teaching of Confucius so influential is based on the circumstances of the time. When this thoughtful, earnest youth woke to the consciousness of life about him, he saw that the abuses under which people generally groaned sprang from the feudal system, which cut up the country into separate territories over which the power of the king had no control. China was in the position of France in the years preceding Philippe Auguste, excepting that there were no places of sanctuary and no truce of God. The great doctrine of Confucius was the unlimited despotism of the emperor, and his moral precepts were intended to teach the emperor how to use his power right. But the emperor was only typical of all those in authority: the feudal duke, the judge on the bench, and the father of the family. Each could discharge his duties aright only by submitting the moral discipline which Confucius prescribed. A vital element in this system is its conservatism, its adherence to the imperial idea. As James I said, "No bishop, no king." So the imperialists of China have found in Confucianism the strongest basis for the throne, and have supported its dissemination accordingly. The Analects of Confucius contain the gist of his teachings, and is worthy of study. We find in this work most of the precepts which his disciples have preserved and recorded. They form a code remarkable for simplicity, even erudity, and we are compelled to admire the force of character, the practical sagacity, the insight into the needs of the hour, which enabled Confucius, without claiming any divine sanction, to impose this system upon his countrymen. The name Confucius is only the Latinized form of two words which mean Master Kung. He was born in 551 BC, his father being governor of Shantung. He was married at 19 and seems to have occupied some minor position under the government. In his 24th year, he entered upon 3 years of mourning for the death of his mother. His seclusion gave him time for deep thought and the study of history, and he resolved upon the regeneration of his unhappy country. By the time he was 30, he became known as a great teacher, and his disciples flocked to him. But he was yet occupied in public duties, and rose through successive stages to the office of chief judge in his own country of Lu. His tenure of office is said to have helped put an end to crime, and he became the idol of the people in his district. The jealousy of the feudal lords was roused by his fame as a moral teacher and a blameless judge. Confucius was driven from his home and wandered about with a few disciples until his 69th year, when he returned to Lu after accomplishing a work which has borne fruit, such as it is to the present day. He spent the remaining 5 years of his life in editing the odes and historic monuments in which the glories of the ancient Chinese dynasty are set forth. He died in his 73rd year, 478 BC. There can be no doubt that the success of Confucius has been singularly great, owing especially to the narrow scope of his scheme, which has become crystallized in the habits, usages, and customs of the people. Especially has it been instrumental in consolidating the empire and in strengthening the power of the monarch, who, as he every year burns incense at the red-walled temple at Pekin, utters sincerely in the invocation, "Great art thou, O perfect sage! Thy virtue is full, thy doctrine complete. Among mortal men there has not been thine equal. All kings honor thee. Thy statutes and laws have come gloriously down. Thou art and the patterns in his imperial school. Reverently have the sacrificial vessels been set out. Full of awe, we sound our drums and bells." And that foreword was written by the guy I was telling you about. So I hope you enjoyed, and I'm planning on reading the rest of the parts. And let me know your thoughts. Have a wonderful day. Take care of yourself.